Hello everyone, this video is intended to help you get started with Project 3 that uses a list widget and a for loop. So let's create a little PyQt5 program to work with a list widget, a for loop, and we'll use the getInteger method of the QInputDialog to get the number of cycles that we want our loop to work with. So in inside Module 3, you'll want to look over this InputDialog material. There are a lot of questions on your homework about the different methods of the QInputDialog. You'll notice that we have to add an import for the QInputDialog to our program. And then once you've imported that, you get all the different methods that come with that QInputDialog. The one that's useful to us in this for loop example is the getInteger method. So this is the way we can use the getInteger method with a for loop or with a number to get it to pop a little dialog up to get a number from the person running the program. So let's create a little Python application, and we'll do the UI and the code in this one video to kind of get you going with that. So I've gone ahead and downloaded the GUI template files so that I have them. You can see right here I've created myself a folder on my flash drive named for loop listbox. I have the two template files out there from Blackboard. I'm going to go ahead and open up the GUI template with Qt5 Designer. You can see all that I have right now is an exit button, so I'm going to resize this dialog so that I have a little bit more room. And let's put another push button on the GUI template. We'll just add a start button here so that we can start something running. So there's our push button. We'll rename it push button start. So I'll triple click there till I get the vertical bar, start, and enter. So now I have a push button start, as you can see. We'll go ahead and save this as listWidget for loop. How about that? listWidget for loop.ui. Okay, listWidget for loop UI. So let's change the text of our push button here to match, or at least make a little more sense. So I scroll down to the property for text on that push button, and I'm gonna make it keyboard shortcut Alt-S, T-A-R-T. So now I have a start push button. We'll go ahead and move these around a little bit where they are kind of balanced. Okay, so I've got that. As long as we're here, let's change the window title of our dialog so that when our application is running, it will show the text that we want right here, where right now it's just showing dialog dash. We'll click on the dialog itself, make sure that's what's selected in your object inspector. Scroll until you see something called window title. See that property called window title? I think on your project 3, you've got to actually set something here to what's mentioned in the project. So we'll go ahead and change this to some text demonstrating a for loop with a list widget. How's that? Actually, let's change this to match the name like that and hit enter. You can see that our window title now, what's showing at the top there, says demonstrating a for loop with a list widget. So we can save this again, and then well, let's put a list widget on here. Remember, the list widget is from the item widget section of the widget toolbox here. So list widget, and drag it over here. We can resize it a little bit. Okay. And look, I think your project names this list widget, or ask you to name it listWidgetout. So I'm going to triple click there in the object inspector and go ahead and hit enter after I change its name to be listWidgetout. So we have this all saved now as soon as I hit the button. So we've got this, and we'll check it just to be sure. I'll close it, and then I'll open listWidget for loop UI up again and make sure that everything's taken. listWidgetout, push button start. Our title is there for the window, window title right there. So looks good. Okay, let's write some Python code for this. So here's our GUI template.py. Gonna open this up with Tani. This comment's wrong, so we'll change that to match our UI file, listWidget for loop. I think that's what it was called. And we'll save this as listWidget for loop. Want to make sure I get into the right place here. To be in home. Actually, I need to be in media. Finally on my flash drive here. Tani's a little bit more of a pain to save something as another name, isn't it? So there's my RCCC folder on my flash drive. 2020 spring, module 3, for loop list box. And we'll change that to listWidget for loop.py. Okay, so listWidget for loop.py, let's make sure that that matches what our listWidget for loop. Okay, that looks good. Here's checking it out. These two match, our UI file and our Python file, so we saved that GUI template.py. Okay, so back to Tani here. There's Tani. We'll change our GUI template to be listWidget for loop.ui. Save that. Let's check our work. Make sure that we're running the right UI file. Give it a second here. There we go. demonstrating a for loop with the list widget. There's our start, there's our list widget. So this is listWidgetout. So the only button that we have that's working right now is our exit button. Okay, so that's working. We're ready to hook up our start button. So I'll click in my constructor here. You can see here's where the exit button was being hooked up. So self.ui.push button start.clicked.connect self.start method. How about that? How about let's make it loop method? You can make it whatever you want. Okay, loop method is what we need to write, so we'll define one of those. Def loop method. Self is always passed to every method. So we're there. We're ready to write our loop method. So the idea here is that we'll write a for loop that will each time through the loop add its number or cycle number, whatever you want to call it, to this list box. And before we do that, we can actually print some text out here to say whatever we want. If we want to write some text in here, we can do that as well. So this is listWidgetout. Okay, so first let's remember we said we were going to ask the person running the program how many times to loop. And in order to do that, we needed to import something extra here. InputDialog. Check in Blackboard. InputDialog. That matches. So we've got that import added so that we can use the getInt method. So remember that when we use that getInt method, it's actually going to return two things: a number, an int, and what button they pressed. And so we could actually take this code right here and adapt it to what we want. So you can compare this code to what it's showing. You see what it's showing at the top, get integer? That's coming from right here. This is shown inside the little dialog. If you look, there's where percentage is shown. This 28 is what the number is populated with to begin with. The minimum value is 0. The max value that you could spin it up to is 100. And it's going to tick by 1 each time you click this little arrow up or down. So that's what these numbers here mean. So let's just save ourselves some typing and copy that. And actually, let's copy the 2 lines because we'll use both of them. And then we'll go back to Tawny here. And we're inside our loop method, so we'll paste. You know, there's some hazards with pasting code. As you can see, when you paste stuff, I had to eliminate some extra blanks and things. Everything has to be properly indented in Python, so you can see if I tab twice, that's indented. Okay, so I is what it had there. Let's change that to num cycles. That's how many cycles our loop is gonna loop. And this is what's going to show up at the top of our loop, or at the top of our dialog. So how about we'll say something like enter number of cycles, and then this is going to show inside the little box number of cycles. We want to populate that to begin with. We could populate it with a 5 just to have something to go on. And we'll say that the minimum could be a 1 and the maximum number that we'll loop is 24. Okay. And our little spinner will spin up 1 tick each time. Okay. Now, we can make our life easy on this. If we want to not do anything in this method, if they clicked anything other than OK, then we could say something like this. Does this make sense? Not OK pressed. And if it's not OK pressed, we'll return. So what's going to happen? If they clicked our button and they for loop push button start, okay, they click push button start and they didn't click OK, they click canceled, we're just going to exit our loop. Okay, so this is our way out if they click cancel. Okay, so next, if you watch the 2 videos on the list widget that I put on the checklist this week, then you'll know that we can save ourselves some typing here. Instead of having to type self.ui.listWidget and so on, we could give ourselves a little shortened name, listWidgetout equals self.ui.listWidgetout. Let's make sure that name right here, listWidgetout, matches what we have in Qt Designer. listWidgetout. Yep, looks like it matches. Okay, so all this is doing is allowing us to type listWidgetout instead of having to type self.ui.listWidgetout. So making our life a little bit easier. So let's write the first line to that list widget using the add item method. This is just going to show up at the number at the top of the list widget, showing some text telling us what's going to happen. So list widget out, our shorthand way of doing this, dot add item. That's the method to add something to the list widget. Number of cycles. Okay. And then we'll concatenate that with the string. Remember, this number of cycles that's coming in is an integer. So if we're going to concatenate it, we have to change it to a string. So that's why I've got the str there, num cycles. Okay. So right now, this is just going to do one thing. If we click that loop, that start button, it's going to jump down here and run this method. And if we clicked OK, then we'll get here. This line will happen, and then we'll get something at the top of our list box that says number of cycles, and it'll say how many we picked. So we'll save this, and then let's run our code. So here's our list widget. We're going to click our start button, and we should see some text come out here if we did everything okay. Number of cycles, there's our input dialog. That's this line right here. Okay. So number of cycles, we could dial it up to 10 if we want to. You see how it was jumping one number each time? We did that. If we try to roll it all the way down, you see the farthest down we can go is 1. We did that too. So, okay, got it to 10. I'm going to click OK. What happened at the top of the list box? Number of cycles, 10. Okay? So let's keep writing code. Now let's write a for loop to roll through. We'll loop starting at 1, and we'll go the number of cycles that they picked here. So for I in range, remember that's the way we do a for loop. Okay. You remember with the range statement, we could tell it to start at 1, run to num cycles plus 1. Why did I do that? Because if you tell it to start at 1, a for loop in Python stops 1 before this number. So if we want to actually go the number of cycles that we specify, let the person pick up here, then we need to add 1 to it. Okay, so that's why we're adding 1 to it. Otherwise, we'd stop at 9 if we pick 10. So now that I've got my for loop there, we can add some more items here. listWidgetout, add item. Okay, and we could do some concatenation here. Cycle number, this is our loop cycle number, plus str. We have to change it to this integer that's I. I's got whatever cycle we're currently on. So I'm changing that to an integer, and then I'm adding that. So this little for loop should whir down through there. Let's see what happens when we run this now. Start. How many cycles do we want this time? Well, let's pick 8. Okay, our for loop should start at 1 and run up to 8. So I'm going to click OK. See, there's number of cycles 8. Cycle 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So you can see that that worked. Okay, so here's our for loop. Now, just so you understand, in project 3, you're going to have to ask for 2 things. You're going to have to ask for how many hours they're traveling. So how many hours would be there. Have them enter the number of hours that they're traveling. Then you're going to have to ask them for how fast are they driving. So you're going to be getting 2 ints instead of 1. You're going to loop the number of hours that they're driving in your for loop, and each time through the for loop you're going to have to multiply whatever speed they picked here with your input dialog. You're going to have to multiply that speed by the current number of hours and calculate how far they've gone. So you've got a few more things that need to happen indented inside this for loop here. But I've given you a good start that you can see works. Okay, you've got a head start on the program. And let's just click cancel and make sure nothing happened. So when I click cancel, did anything print out? Nothing. So that's because we jumped out of this method right here. When it hit that return, it didn't do the rest of the stuff because it had already jumped out of the method. Okay, that's our video to help you get started with Project 3. Remember, you've got to ask for 2 things instead of 1, so you'll have 2 sets of these. You'll be asking for the number of hours, and you'll have to ask for how fast they're driving. And then inside your for loop, you're going to be running a little calculation to figure out, okay, they've driven 2 hours at 60 miles an hour. What do I need to print here for how far they've traveled? Okay, well, good luck with project 3.